video for the first time. My name is Michael Haldis. I'm an author and a podcaster and a speaker, and I do these adult classes under the blessings of Father Christopher Metropolis, the executive director of OCN, and also the managing director, Eleni Alexio, and then everybody else at OCN. And of course, this is a local ministry here at the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland. And this class is taught under the blessing of our Postdominos, Father Demetrius Antokis. So we've been doing this. Let somebody in. We've been doing this since January of 2017, live on OCN. We've been doing this class now. We're going into our 9th year. So we've been doing this for quite a while. And we've tinkered with the format over the years, but I just wanted to say at the outset, this is going to be a little bit different this year than what we typically do. Not too much, but I'm going to try to go a little bit more to a Socratic method. Ask some more questions, get a dialogue going a little bit sooner, rather than spending as much time in opening lecture format. So hopefully that'll work. I think it'll be much better. The other thing that we're going to do a little bit different this year, per the theme, the teaching theme for this year is beauty, goodness, and truth. And it's very important we understand them in that order. You may have heard these words used a lot associated with orthodoxy and our understanding of our faith, but you usually hear them truth, goodness, and beauty, more in that order. Everyone's important, but what I want to do this year is move us not away from rational thinking or cognition, but take us to a place, hopefully to the extent that I can and that we can in this room, take us to a place where we're focused on the beauty of God first, that really opens our hearts, that eventually leads to the goodness, and it leads to the understanding of truth, because truth is not a set of facts or pieces of information. Truth is a person. Christ is truth. And we understand more and more about Christ, not through so much rational arguments, but through the relationship we have with Christ, which is manifested through each other, right? That's how most of us, George and I were just talking, most of us experience God through the love and sharing of life with other people, not necessarily in visions or intuitions or things like that. Some do, obviously, but most of us do not. So what really led to this, I had a pretty rough summer, just really traumatic and just busy and all kinds of stuff. But it was an occasion for me to go a little bit deeper in my reading. And I read some of, what do you want to call them, leading theologians of the day. Metropolitan Callistus Ware of blessed memory often said that Metropolitan John Zizioulas is the greatest living theologian we have. He said that. So I read a couple of books by Metropolitan John. I'd read some of his writings before, but he's a brilliant, thinker is not the right word I want to use, but he just understands, and he can communicate a lot of deep things in a way difficult at first to grasp, but it works on you over time. And I read Father John Baer, Dr. Timothy Petitsis, who I'll be talking a lot about his work today, and that's what got me really oriented to let's try to take this to a deeper level this year, if you will, focused on beauty, goodness, and truth. And really, probably any failure of Christianity here in the West, and I don't necessarily mean a failure of Western Christianity versus Eastern, because this is just a failure of Western culture to some extent, is getting these things out of order and trying to understand truth first, strictly through rationality and cognition, without really understanding the beauty of God or the experience of the beauty of God. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Again, to be clear, all three are important. They all need to go together. So let me start off. I want to read you a quote from Dr. Petitsis' work. He wrote a book called The Ethics of Beauty, which I recommend you read. I think, and the thing's got to percolate for a while, but I think when I think of the seminal books I've read in my life, I didn't think I'd read another one, because most of that time that happened when you're younger, right? But this may be one that I put in that category. There's three others that come to mind right now. There may be one that I put in that category. It's a really good book. But he writes this. He reminds us of something pretty profound. He says the theology of the church did not begin with considerations or the intellectual method, nor with concerns about the wider relevance or usefulness of the gospel message. Christian theology began with beauty rather than truth or goodness. The central text about Orthodox Christian prayer life, the Philokalia, itself means love of the beautiful. So let that sink in for a moment. I want to tell you a story. I'm going to use a story that happened in my life as the basis for what we're going to discuss today and probably in future weeks to come. I don't think we'll cover everything today. When I was in college, I may have told this in here, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. When I was in college, I had a friend who considered himself agnostic, maybe atheist. He wasn't sure, but faith and religion was no part of his life. I didn't know anything back then. I may know nothing now, but whatever I know now, I knew less then. But we would debate because I believed. But I never made a dent in his journey of faith, right? I probably couldn't argue anything with any great degree back then anyway, but whatever I was doing, it made no difference to him whatsoever. Married his college sweetheart. We were all friends. They go along in life. They have a couple kids. And then things change in their marriage. And eventually he finds out that she's having an affair. And his life starts spiraling downhill. Got a call from him. I forget the timelines of this, but probably 10 years after college. I get a call, and he explained to me he now believes. He was in his bathroom shaving when he had what he described as a nervous breakdown. And he said, in that moment, he said, I felt Jesus Christ in the room. So that moment of his greatest trauma to date, that moment of his breakdown, he encounters Christ. Went into the bathroom, an agnostic or atheist, came out a believer, which he is to this day. He goes to a Baptist church, and he's so to begin the discussion, my assertion is that moment of trauma was a moment of beauty, theophany, repentance, and theosis, all wrapped in there. So let's delve deep into that. So let's start. So let me just ask a basic question. What is theophany?
God revealing himself to you.
God's revelation of himself. And I think the better Greeks in there. I think is a direct translation mean appearance of God? Is that the literal translation? Yeah.
When you appear someplace, yeah.
Hi, Nicole.
Appearance of God.
Yeah, appearance of God. Okay. And that's true. A monk, Hiero monk, I don't know how to pronounce that right, Maximus, who's a living monk in Australia, he reminds us that appearance of God is not just related to individual incidents in our lives, right? That he says the world, he said absolutely everything in the world, everything is theophany. That means from creation, from angels to atomic particles, all of it is a revelation of God. The Greek word theophania, is that the way to pronounce it? Theophania means something like God made apparent or God shining forth. So theophany is all around us, ever present at all times, right? Present right now amongst us in this room, okay? So the point being, the beauty of the Lord is everywhere at all times. It's just our ability sometimes to perceive it and to experience it. And of course, we're conditioned that beauty has to be something physically attractive, whether it's a person or a landscape or a piece of art. And that's all true, but it exists deeper than that. And I would assert, I'll make this assertion and see if you agree, that the more we grow spiritually, the more that we see, understand, and experience the beauty of the Lord in things beyond just what are beautiful just to the eye.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nodding heads. So I would actually suggest that beauty is why you're here, not to look at me, right? But let me flatter myself. But think about it. What are you here for? What motivates you, right? It's not because of some tremendous intellectual cognitive discourse or anything like that. There's something motivating you deeper than that, deeper than just your ability commensurate with your IQ to understand things. There's something, because this class coming here is just one little thing amongst the broader things you all do to seek a deeper relationship with Christ, right? Right. We can all agree to that. So I don't know if you ever thought about it that way, but that's really what's motivating you is the beauty of the Lord. So let me tee up another question for you. I'm going to put some pressure on you because I ran this like a good husband. I ran this lesson by my wife, who can't be here today because she has some kind of sinus-related infection. And I asked her this question, and she got it within 5 seconds. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'll put you all on the spot. So where in the Bible do we see beauty, trauma, theophany, and repentance all linked together? What event in the Bible? One. I'm teasing. She knows how I think, so that's a little bit of an advantage. Yeah, beauty, trauma, theophany, and repentance. And granted, there could be more than one answer. So I didn't think it through that much, but there's one place it's, when I say the answer, you'll be like, okay.
How about Luke with the birth of Christ?
Close.
Well, once you mentioned trauma, aren't we discussing the crucifixion?
Exactly. Yeah, the crucifixion. Yeah. I mean, there's other places we could say, because one thing, and we were talking about this yesterday, John, one thing we see is that, events in the life of Christ were usually fulfillments of something that we can trace back to the Old Testament, right?
Mhm.
So, Job could be another person who read the book of Job, but that thing. Yeah. So, and we're celebrating the cross on Wednesday, right? So, let me paraphrase something else from Dr. Petitis's book that you may have not thought about. So, we know the story of the thieves on either side. So in the midst of the crucifixion, the good thief sees that the Savior, perceives that this person is the Savior dying for him, dying for us. And for that reason, that good thief allows his own trauma, his own crucifixion to be transformed. This is what Dr. Petitis writes and explains to it. So even though the good thief is being traumatized at that very moment, that moment of trauma, because he perceives the beauty of the Lord, what the Lord is doing, right, becomes his salvific moment. Again, where I'm going with this is I'm linking trauma and suffering hopefully in a way that's resonating with you to where we can also be experiencing the beauty of the Lord. So it's an experience of theophany, right? An appearance of the Lord. Because even though he's physically right there, that thief did not perceive or understand who it was. Because if you read all four gospel accounts, I think it's Matthew versus what we read in Luke. But you can build a case that thief, both those thieves began today jeering at the Lord. But one had a moment over time hanging there where and then Dr. Petitis also points out that St. Maximus the Confessor at some point transitioned to thinking there was a bad thief. And he said the lack of retort from the bad thief shows that he came around too at some point. So that's what St. Maximus says. So it's an interesting...
Spoken in generosity.
Yeah, right. It's an interesting concept, an interesting thought to have, but go ahead.
There's also a problem here. We don't know everything that took place.
No, we don't.
At the crucifixion, right? We know what the gospel writers included in their accounts.
Mm-hmm.
But there may have been other statements, and for whatever reason, they weren't passed down to the gospel writers, so we don't know every single detail. So I'm not sure why we'd want to sort of figure out what the other thief might have said. But that's just a quick comment here, because you brought it up. But Michael, let me just ask you a larger question.
Sure.
If I might.
You may.
Help my rational mind understand what you mean by beauty in this context, right? Because my sort of limited blinders on perspective is, okay, beautiful in terms of material beauty, a physical beauty, a sort of universal beauty, right? We look at the universe, or we look at microscopic particles, we look at people. Okay, we get that part, but is that too narrowly cast? Is there a larger understanding of beauty that you're looking to impart here that I haven't caught on to yet?
yes, I can't speak to what you're catching on to, but
Well, I'm telling you my
Yeah.
limited perspective. I'm thinking there's something larger here that I don't understand yet. And maybe if you can just take some time and explain to us how you define the beauty in the context of the beauty
Sure.
of the Lord, or beauty in the context of beauty, goodness, and truth.
I'll share with you what led me to feel that this is the direction we should need to go, because something troubles me a lot. And I was thinking about, we're beginning this class on 9/11, and arguably one of the most traumatic events in our country, and we have the cross coming up, right? And our priest here actually has a cross made from some of the iron of
Steel girders.
a steel
Yeah.
girder of the World Trade Center. And I started thinking about certain things, and then I encounter Dr. Petit's book and some other things that kind of arguably one of my worst moments in recent years over the summer. And a couple other things congealed in my head, and here's where I'm going with this. The cross, right? The cross is a moment of intense suffering and trauma of our Lord, right? One of the things that happens to us in the West is an overemphasis on the crucifixion separated from the resurrection. We really should never talk about them separately, because without the resurrection, the cross is not beautiful, right? But with the resurrection, the suffering, the pain, taking on of sin is beautiful, right? That's where I'm going with this.
But it inspires us as beauty does.
Yes.
As beauty does.
Yes, that's better put. The inspiration, the cross, is because we know what he did up there, what he went through, right? Think about it. I mean, what's more beautiful than someone entering into someone else's suffering for nothing more than love of that person, not thinking of themselves, right? That's where I'm going with this. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think we process that kind of thing mentally, right? Yeah, of course, it's sacrificial, blah, blah, blah. But then when we actually, and this is where I want to go, is, and I'm not asking you to share whatever you want, but I would say to you, think about your own traumas in life. And we've all had them, right? And we've all had them to different degrees, right? So don't compare your trauma to someone else's trauma and like make it like your trauma is trivial, because that's not the case at all. Whatever trauma you've gone through, whatever suffering, it's your suffering, right? It doesn't matter if someone else's is greater. But we've all been through that kind of thing. And just like my friend, right? He had a breakthrough moment of beauty. Nothing mattered rationally what I told him. Wouldn't have mattered if Metropolitan Callisto was where I told him. He wouldn't have accepted it at that time, right? He just wouldn't have. So I mean, and John, I'm not trying to fumble or be long-winded. This is not something that's hard to answer in a sentence, but I wanted to share with you at least what's motivating me, or inspiring me is a better word. Motivation tends to be more about self-interest than inspiration. But this is what inspired me to try to go down this road this year, to see the beauty in things, like that, where we often overlook them. Make sense at all? Does that help? Or we'll explore this more.
It opens the aperture.
That's better. That's a good way to put it, right? I mean, so do you agree? I mean, do you agree when you think about your own traumas and suffering? Do you agree that that often our worst moments are the moments where we have our deepest encounter with the Lord?
Yep.
Anybody want to share anything? You have to share exactly what it is. Anything you want to share about that?
Yes.
Go ahead, Marisa.
My husband has entered a phase of what is known, his doctor says, short-term memory loss. And this is disastrous. It's very complicated. It's made our lives very complicated. He gets lost. Calls me on the phone. Can't use his cell phone. Can't remember how to do it. Calls me, flags the car. Could you please call my wife? And of course, they're looking at him up and down. 88-year-old man, neatly dressed, wants me to get out of my car and use his phone. Has he got a gun? So we have interesting times together. We went to California to see his sister. She is a widow, 92. She published her last book 3 years ago, so there's no grass growing on this good lady. And we flew to San Francisco. From there, She lives in Berkeley. And so she said, well, just take an Uber. I want to avoid doing that. So I said, Louise, we're going to take the BART. You get it right in the San Francisco airport. And you don't get off in Berkeley. You get off it's called Rock Ridge. So Bill and I are standing on the platform, and he's talking to everybody and speaking whatever language anybody speaks. The train arrives. We're on the right platform, on the right side of the platform. The door opens. We have roll-on suitcases. So I roll in. The door closes. No bill.
Oh, Lord.
And we're not going to Berkeley. We're going to Road Ridge. And I'm thinking, what went through my mind? Where is he? Oh, he's in another train. Then I can't get out of my car to his car. If he's on the train, the thoughts that went through my mind were positively astonishing. The very first one was, if I see him, I am really going to have an act out. And the second one was, oh my God, what am I going to tell his sister? You lost him on the platform. I have my cell phone and I'm thinking, oh, it says right there, if you're in trouble, call this number. Police will come immediately. Okay, I could do that. But suppose he's on the train. Well, he has plenty of money and he knows the address and he has IDs and all this stuff. He can take a taxi. So I'm thinking about this. It takes 45 minutes to get to stop. God, door opens, I get off. And who's there but Bill George?
Wow.
He was in the car behind me. And he
Oh
says,
my
where
God.
were you?
Wow.
Anyway, they kill him, right?
Yeah.
No, I was so grateful.
Right.
But it's the series of things that you think about
Mhm.
that was so revealing to me. First of all, I'm mad. And then the second one was, what am I going to tell his sister?
Hmm.
You lost my brother? And then, how can I solve this? And I realized in the end, he's got this, he can do this. And not only that, the Lord watches over him. And it'll be fine. Whatever it is, it'll be fine. Years and years of whatever it is. It'll be
Yeah.
fine. And
That-
it worked.
That's hard, though, for a lot of people to have that level of faith that God is in control no matter what, especially during our traumas and suffering, right? Because everything feels so out of control. Would you say, I mean, if you don't answer if you don't want to, but would you say that, because obviously you've been married a long time, would you
Yes.
say
A
that,
million years.
I don't quite think that long, but God bless you.
Most of my life.
Would you say that the shared sufferings and traumas brought you closer together?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He was very sweet. And I put my arms around him and kissed him and said, gosh, I was really worried. I hope I didn't worry you too much. This is unusual. He does not usually think I worry.
Hmm.
So, but why is that easier for me, I think, than for some? I lived in India for 8 years, in South America, 2 revolutions for almost 18 years. Those kinds of things, you can't count on anything except this moment, these people. And so I don't anticipate that. It's liberating.
Do you believe there's purpose in everything?
Sure.
No.
Shaking a head, nodding head, sure.
I do.
No. And the reason is because I shudder to think at the purpose of horrific events. So deep down, maybe theologically, there's a purpose. And as we've talked about in this class on other occasions, there's earthly justice and there's divine justice. And we don't understand divine justice. But from an earthly perspective, when I hear about horrific things that happen to people, I have a hard time believing there's a purpose to that. So,
Fair answer.
Are you saying a purpose to things that happen? Is that just?
Well, what I'm getting at is we're talking about traumatic things and suffering, and we've all been through them. And some people, not in this room that I'm aware of, but some people have joined online that have had the ultimate nightmares happen to them, right?
Mhm.
Losing a child or something like that. And for me, one of my reluctances to accept that is, I'll admit it, I feel like I don't want to bring anything on myself, right? Yeah, because it's hard to believe, like you said, John, that within atrocities there's purpose. But the conclusion where I'm at right now is I do believe there is, and I do believe it gets back to something you just said, but with the understanding that our Orthodox journey is deeper into the mystery of the Lord, not necessarily knowing everything, and we'll know what we need to know when we need to know it. But I started thinking the flip side of that. If something atrocious happens to you and you don't believe there's any purpose to it, what are you left with? What are you really left with?
That's logic at work, is it? Is it not?
It's a little bit of logic, but I started thinking if purpose is driving you to your point, Maritza, if purpose is driving you to figure it out logically, that's a bad thing. I mean, to some extent. But if purpose reminds you, like Metropolitan Callisto said, faith is not the definition that something's true, it's that someone's there.
Mm-hmm.
So if purpose, ascribing purpose to everything is leading you to just, okay, God, I don't get this, but you're there. That's a different thing altogether than trying to work it out logically like a theorem or a proof or something. And I think that, having just the belief, no matter what, that God's purpose is at work, I'm throwing it out there for discussion, is the difference sometimes really between life and death, spiritual life and death per se. But we know because we see it in Genesis. We know that we can spiritually die and physically live a long time, but at some point we're going to die. And the reason we're going to die is because of spiritual death. There would be no physical death without spiritual death. And, Christ is our life support, detached from him. So, thoughts?
I have a good example of that. So when I was in my 20s, I had a boss who passed away from a brain tumor, and he didn't believe in God. He was a very loud atheist, and he knew like my background and everything. And he would always tell me, like, we would debate, and he's like, "Oh, that's all a bunch of bunk." That whenever I hear the word bunk, I think of him.
Yeah.
But he died with no hope. And then on the flip side of that, Father Tim's best friend died of esophageal cancer when he was in his mid-40s. But he was a priest, and his whole life was committed to believing in God and serving God. And he underwent treatment that I would say was not fit for an animal, because it was like experimental treatment. But he never once wavered in his faith. So I compare those two people. Like, his name was Father Peter, and he always looked to, the next life. But my boss just was bitter and grumbling and just died with no hope. So I just think
It's sad.
it is sad.
But what did it give you to know him, the grumpy one? Did it not? Did it not give you perspective
It did.
in a
Yeah.
way? So
He served a purpose.
Right.
Now, I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but it's true.
Uh-huh.
we have a couple that we're close friends with. They adopted a child many, many years ago. This child is now 24 years old. He can say water. That is all. He's profoundly retarded. They have never grumbled about the burden this child must give them. And their life is just such an illumination to the rest of us.
Right.
What do you mean the air conditioning's off? You don't have that, and then you don't have this, and you don't have that. The car broke down, and credit card bills or whatever they're called. Think of Robert and Susan. So maybe this.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too, we have to be careful. Too much speculation. What I'm about to say, but we really don't know. We really don't know where the hearts of people are, especially in the moment where they're transitioning into death. And that's why we never try to play God in a very prescriptive way. And as Orthodox Christians, we know that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And we know, those of us that have been given the gift to participate in the church, we know how we know what we know how to seek salvation, which is to seek Christ, to love God and love others. But we don't know how God is working in the hearts of others. So we can hope for him,
Sure.
even though, and then we can see the purpose or something he did in your life, right? And we can just hold on to that. Now, that this challenges our Western secular mindset to wishful thinking and Pollyanna and all this cynicism that creeps in all the time. But we don't fall prey to that because we know it's nonsense, right? Because we know what happens with no hope. We wither. So, Tina, hi Tina. Our friend Tina's online. She has said that there's an ancient Greek saying that something good always comes out of something bad. And that's so true. We just have to look for it. That's what she's writing. It's true. Has anybody had that experience of really struggling to see it in their own life, and when they finally do, it flips a switch, so to speak, where let me ask you, did anybody have that happen? Did anybody want to share what it did to them when they?
I couldn't remember, without boring over the details, where I was like struggling and fighting for a certain outcome,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm working real hard, and I'm thinking this is it, and everything's against me, and I'm swimming across the tide, and then one day the revelation came to me, George, maybe you should be turning around and swimming with the tide, because you're trying to get your will and your thought of what the outcome should be, and in the long run, I realized, what was I thinking? I mean, it was like it was bizarre, and you get to realize, and I'm keeping it kind of generic because sometimes you're there and you're fighting so hard and you're being rough on yourself and maybe rough with people around you, and then somewhere you just come to some clarity in your mind and your soul, and you go, wow, what the heck am I doing? No. Back yourself, the self, out of this. Let's look at the bigger picture. I mean, if you do that, reflection and prayer and that, lots of times, very helpful. And then you realize, oh, I can see the point. And then later on, you reflect like, of course, why didn't I see that at the beginning? You just go with what it is, and the outcome that you were all worried about, and everything was going to fall apart. Doesn't fall apart. In fact, things turned out in the long run okay.
Yeah, so much of what we do is like trying to hammer a nail with a broken hammer when we use our will. Because we were talking about it before we went live. Because what does our Orthodox faith teach us that was damaged in us? Not our nature. Our nature is fundamentally good because God created everything good. It's our will, our ability to think and choose rightly all the time. So what do as human beings? We try to will our way through it. And we're using a damaged tool, to do it. So it's doomed to failure at some point. Some of us are brighter and have greater determination and willpower than others, but so you're just going to fight longer and harder before you fail. And some of us are blessed with stupidity and other things that we fail sooner and come to a conclusion, hey, we shouldn't be doing this, right? So.
Well, Michael, I remind myself every night when I'm before my icons, and I do the Lord's Prayer, and the phrase "Thy will be done," is always that reminder of. I mean, it has more meaning to me now than ever before. Like, just remember, George, it's not your will, it's God's will. So. But
most of us pray the prayer, "Thy will be done," but take this advice, right? Right? I mean, let's face it.
How about this time?
How about okay? But just take mine into consideration a little bit. And then the great cure for that usually is our own suffering, where we realize the foolishness, right? St. Paul talked about that all throughout the New Testament, right? Tear out down all the arguments. What is it? It's foolishness to the Greeks, right? The cross.
Yeah.
Because they didn't see the other side, right? If you don't believe that Christ came back, was resurrected, then the cross is foolishness. Why suffer? There's no redemptive value in it. Go ahead, John.
At the risk of being the skunk in the room.
No, please be the skunk.
What if his will is not being done? Right? Like, his will is not always being done. Right? We're sinning all the time. So his will is not always being done. So if his will is not being done, then maybe there isn't a purpose to certain acts. I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out here, Michael, and maybe I'm trying to be too.
Why do you think his will is not being done? Christ said, not a sparrow falls to the ground dead apart from the will of the Father. So why would you think? Why?
Because I can't square like to the points that I made before that things that, and it's not the why do bad things happen to good people.
Right.
That's one thing. Why do animalistic things happen to completely innocent people? That, as opposed to like illness and things like that, butchery,
Hmm.
like things we don't need to describe in detail. So,
But it's good. I mean, I know where you're going. It's good.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
so a much wiser individual instructed me several months ago that one of the worst things you can say to somebody when they've lost somebody, when somebody has departed this life, is, well, that's God's plan.
Oh, it's a horrible thing to say.
It's a horrible
Yeah.
thing
It's
to say.
insensitive. It's ugly.
Yes.
But also that it's not God's plan for people to depart this life, right? This goes back to creation. Adam and Eve and their ancestral sin is what brought death on mankind. That wasn't God's plan, if we want to talk about God's plan. And if I'm confusing things, if I'm not saying it correctly, stop me. So if death is not God's plan, and am I confusing plan and purpose? I'm not sure if I am or not. That's why I keep coming back to when I hear about innocent people, quote unquote, seemingly innocent. Well, let's just say children. Okay, that's
Yeah.
right. So they have to be innocent. They're children. Forget about adults for a second. What's the purpose? I don't see it. So I'm sure there's a purpose that I don't understand, right? Our puny mortal minds, as we like to remind ourselves.
Mhm.
But day to day, I have a very difficult time reconciling these matters. That's all. I'm not walking around through life torn all the time. All I'm saying is there are certain things that I just say, okay, I don't understand. I will never understand.
Mhm.
I don't want to attempt to reconcile this with my faith. I'll just leave it in that category of things I don't understand in this life and just let it be. But I can't believe that everything has a purpose, because some things seem so disgusting to me. They can't have a purpose, at least not a godly purpose, not a divine purpose. So even if somebody can benefit from it afterwards, that like
Does this child need to suffer like this?
Christ
Unlived life.
surrendered himself.
Mhm.
But a lot of these other people don't surrender themselves. Horrible things happen to them and they disappear. And I have a hard time believing that there's a divine purpose to savagery and butchery to God's creatures. So I don't
Yeah.
mean to take it into too narrow a direction.
No,
but
no.
You're giving me a lot to think about here.
That's exactly what I want to happen this year. I want these kind of questions. I want us to get in dialogue. I want us to ask the things that are really troubling us. So let me try to address that. Emphasize
Yeah.
try. Because I've like you, like all of us, like people online, we've all wrestled with this. Nicole brings up there's also a devil at work, right? There is evil. There's evil out there, and evil will do evil things.
Spiritual warfare.
Spiritual-
all the time.
Spiritual warfare is mainly in here. And this is why we have the aesthetics in the Orthodox Church. Let me just digress for a second to remind us, because we don't believe that the primary sin is pride. That's an intellectual sin. That comes later. The primary sins come from the sensual parts of ourselves. So the way, before it emanates out to become that prideful, that's why we have all the aesthetics to get all that in line so we can get ourselves in order. Having said that, let's talk about what we understand about purpose and evil. So there is no purpose in the sense of that God is ordaining this child to be savage, right? What we understand is that Revelation 21:5, one of the key scriptures, behold, I make all things new. We're only in the preface of the book here, right? We don't know what comes next. So we have a choice to either to not. Christ said, in this world, trouble will come. These things will happen, right? And we know this stuff's going to happen. What we believe is God transforms it all. We're not going to see it here. We're just not. And that sounds like, to a lot of people, that sounds like wishful thinking or Pollyanna, all that stuff, until you go through your own suffering and trauma. And you don't have to go through that same thing, but you just taste a little bit of that and you really go low and you really have the depths of pain and trauma. Or you talk to people that have, and they get that right away, right? They get it because they've seen the hell, right? They've seen it up close and they've come through the other side. And the pain never goes away. You and I talked about this. Christ's wounds didn't go away,
Mhm.
right? Jacob in Genesis, whatever it was, when he becomes Jacob the deceiver to Israel, he who wrestled with God, he gets a wound in his hip, right? There's, our wounds, everything's transformed in Christ, and it's really difficult to assimilate that. That's why it's really bad when someone's going through that stuff to say those dumb things to them. God has a plan for your child dying. God has a plan for your spouse dying. No, it's an awful thing to say. The best thing you can do is just suffer with them and enter into their suffering. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. If you've had the experience of something happening to you through somebody else and you don't want it, you're like, what is this? I didn't sign up for this. This isn't my deal. I don't want this. But you reluctantly or more lovingly and willingly at first, you enter into it with them. You become transformed. They become transformed. That transformation opens your heart to the beauty of God amidst the worst ugliness. And it's hard. There's nothing beautiful about people dying in towers on 9/11, right? But if you've been to the 9/11 museum, you've talked to people, like, I went through this tour where someone survived it. You hear things, and people still suffer from that. You hear these amazing things, the beauty that came out of that day, that moment. It's amazing. It's a wonder why everything just doesn't dissolve. It doesn't, because God's love is always present, even in those things. And although I'm trying to explain it to an extent, I'm not going to claim to know it completely. But we are, we're limited human beings. We have to, have dialogue about these things. It's just something I feel like I've taken a bite out of the sandwich, so I can talk about it a little bit. I haven't consumed the whole thing, and nor do I want to, because that just means more suffering. But enough to know that losing hope is it's spiritual death, right? So no, that's the best I can do with that. And that so for my progression was, okay, come on, to okay, I get it. Oh, now I'm starting to get it. And I don't know where this is going with me personally. I don't know where it's going with any of you. But the more you journey through life, the more you do these things, and the more that you do abandon yourself in sharing someone else's suffering, I think that's really what the cross is. The cross has everything in it, because the cross is the fulfillment, right? The cross is all of our suffering, trauma, fear, hope, and fulfilled hope wrapped into one, right? That help at all?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know where to go after that. That's so emotional, really, when you think about it, right? But has anybody else had? You don't have to say what it is. Have you really had that experience in your own trauma where you can look at it now and say, I didn't want that. I still don't want it. But God, I sense you in it, to the point where I can endure it, and I can even embrace it. Because I think, to your point, one of the things we do is always avoidance or combat, not embrace it and experience it. Make sense? Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I have a story, not as deep as what goes on in the world,
Mhm.
children and everything, but years back I had a bad car accident, and with a concussion that I didn't even remember being diagnosed with. Memory loss. It was pretty awful. Couldn't read, couldn't comprehend anything I was reading. Took a good year. But as I was seeing patients again, it gave me a glimpse into my patients who have had strokes with memory loss and who will never get that memory back. It just showed me that year, it gave me a picture of what my patients experience on an ongoing basis. And then I remember having somebody who came in, and I looked at him, and he had the same blank look that I remember people told me I had, like in my eyes. It was just like this blank look. And he had had a car accident. After I did the evaluation, everything in that sense was normal. And then I had told him I had had a concussion and I was recovering. I remember after I gave him his test results, he says, well, that's all good, but can we just talk for a little bit? And I said to myself, if this year taught me anything, this horrible experience gave me that little bit more of empathy for my patients who suffer from memory loss. And this is going to be an ongoing thing, whether it be a stroke or an accident. And then that one gentleman who came into my office, I said, well, maybe that's who I was meant to meet, in that sense, just to give him a little hope that it will get better. You will recover from it. It'll drive you nuts. But so I'm always looking for things, and sometimes it doesn't come. I remember I had another experience where in my 20s I had a very traumatic experience, and then 20 years later somebody came to me. I said, okay, and it was 20 years.
Mhm.
So I'm always looking for those things because that's the only way I can make reason of things. But I also think that they shape you in a way that we would never be shaped before, and you become the person you are because of these traumatic situations.
And see, that's the beauty of God, right at work. I mean, I don't, what do I know compared to anybody else, but I would speculate that God didn't say, let's have Andrea get in an accident today so she develops empathy, right? But it happened to you, right? And so what happened after that? It was transformative to an extent, right? Because it opened your heart in an empathetic way to share in someone else's suffering. That's what I mean by the beauty, right? Somebody would hear this and say, that's nonsense, right? There's no beauty in pain. But there can be, because we share each other's burdens through that. And we don't know. Sometimes things happen, and we talk about signs or whatever. The best thing to do is probably in those situations say, okay, this could be a sign of something. But then you patiently wait, and over time you can discern what it really meant. But that's a wonderful thing to share, because it's exactly what we're trying to talk about today. Is something good, like Tina said, something good came out of something that was traumatic to you. I can share that. I've had nasty concussions around it. I don't remember anything I said or did, but it could be a little bit traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, were you gonna say something, or you just? All right. Let's. I didn't unpack everything, but let's go in on something else a little bit with the remaining time we have, and then we'll continue this next week. So I mentioned that a couple of things I mentioned happened on the cross. One of which was theosis. So what is theosis? Anybody want to? We've talked about it before. We all have some understanding of what it is, but how would you define theosis, if you're comfortable?
Becoming like God.
Mm-hmm. That's becoming like God. That's our whole purpose as human beings. We were created to become Christ-like. Reason I brought that up is I wanted to challenge something about our understanding of theosis that I think I've slipped into it before. Maybe you have too. But an equivalent term is, deification, right? And so Dr. Batista wrote in his book that he points out, and I think he's right, that in our contemporary culture, which he calls our contemporary Gnostic culture, as we all seek that special knowledge that's going to set us apart, right? We hear it in competitive business all the time, something to set you apart from your competition, blah, 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 right? But all, to set us apart. As he says, sometimes we slip into thinking of theosis too much as our individualistic spiritual experience, Christ, right? And he says, true theosis means becoming friends with Christ, okay? Becoming friends with Christ. Because you've walked with and are committed to walking, whatever the cost, the way he walked, which for us means that he calls it an ardent eros. And we can get into that in the future. Mm-hmm. Eros we associate because we reduce everything. We associate it with erotica or even pornography. But eros just means, I think the direct is desire, right? So when he talks about it, he's talking about this eros for Christ, where we just have a desire for Christ. We have a desire to know. We just want to be with him and be like him. And this is what the aesthetics, the sacramental life do to us. We practice them to kind of purify our desires, to get the sensual part of us in line, so that we can have eros and agape and philia, all these descriptions of love rolled into one. And that's really what theosis is. That's why theosis cannot really be truly experienced in an individualistic way. We can't become Christ-like apart from each other. And what usually brings us together a lot of times is shared suffering. Not all the time, but a lot of times what bonds people really close. Talk to people that have served in combat. Because in my business, I do a deal a lot with people that are former military that have fought, and the bonding between these people that have shared, trusted their life or gone through shared suffering in war, in the atrocity of war situations, and kept their humanity. It's strong. So, thoughts on that? Is that something you already kind of thought about before, or had that in your head? I mean, about theosis, or did it jar you a little bit to kind of think about it differently as friendship with Christ, or not in your own personal journey per se, but the shared journey? Struck me.
You just triggered a memory. I was at work, and I had a fellow that would take a break every now and then, and he'd read the Bible. Now, reading the Bible, I'm sorry, at work nowadays is just like, oh my God. He talked to me. He was a veteran, and he was in Iraq, and his vehicle got hit by one of the landmines, right? And he was in the hospital for a long time. He's got all his pieces together, so to speak. He didn't lose anything. He's the only person who survived out of like 6 people in the vehicle. And so when you talk about that kind of bond, and he had the bond with several of the people, he didn't know some of them that well, but that was a bad incident, right, that he talked about, that put him on the path to understand, his spiritualism. Not that he's, we chatted. He was never an atheist,
right?
And he did kind of, went to church, but the kind of in the sense that you're talking about, the desire was much greater there. And we just chatted about it, and you could tell that took about a pivotal moment in your life. I mean, he was in hospitals for months.
So he went through significant trauma.
Significant, and apparently it was armor plated, but the way it hit and just where he happened to be, he's the one that
All on the
survived.
road to
Did he?
Yeah.
Did he go through any PTSD?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. See, Dr. Petitsis talks about this in his book, and I know this to be, not that I would not believe him, but I know this to be true just because of my own business life. Military hospitals and approaches, they understand this. They don't call it like this, but they understand. They've watched trying to deal with PTSD through, for lack of better terms, through kind of rational based approaches. But they wouldn't use this terminology, but they've learned to move people to an experience of beauty, move them in a different direction. That's the only thing that helps with trauma in the end, because trauma, I don't know a lot about it, but I know that it's not just here. You go through anything. Trauma can, be other parts of our body and live there, right? It's not just in our heads. So sometimes, as we try to rationalize too much or go through rational approaches to dealing with the trauma, it makes it worse, because then we become aware of it, but we can't do anything about it because we don't have the tools, right? And so that's why a lot of and they're moving more in this direction. They've understood that this is not helping with our former military. They've gone through PTSD, so they have a different modality they move them to, and you can link it to this beauty first approach, to this, not the truth first approach. So because truth is truth wherever we find it, inside the church, outside the church. Truth is, God is everywhere present, fills all things. So all truth is God's truth, right? No matter where we find it. That gets hard sometimes, because sometimes in our reductionist way, hey, if it's not Orthodox, it's not true. If it's not Christian, it's not true. No, truth is truth. We're just learning, right? So it's important. So he suffered.
Oh yeah.
And is he
Yeah,
better?
it was several things. Part of it was survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah.
Why not? Why did he die and why did I live? And then part of it was just his calling to just to read there and to just get more in tune with himself and stuff. And it's interesting. And I had brought up the issue of, well, not that he's waving the Bible around and getting on top of his chair at work, but it's sitting there. And he basically, his thought was, I almost died and I really don't care.
That's so refreshing. I know people like that. They just don't care because they've been through it. They just don't
I
care.
almost died. What's really important here? According to the Bible, that he says that's important. He says the rest of this, I do a good job, but that's secondary. And it was very apparent he didn't care if anybody talked. No, and nobody ever did, actually.
I was going to say, I bet you he didn't.
No, he didn't have any. Not one. But the culture nowadays, you're a little more aware. He was out there, and I was kind of like, Well, you're on a really good journey from where you were,
Yeah, I haven't been.
Interesting
It,
trajectory.
I've been on my own in my own business since January of '07, but I still deal with corporations, right? But I haven't been inside a corporation since that, so I don't know. All I do remember this though, and I see it. I even see it today to an extent. We talk a lot about this religious hostility, but people that are authentic like that, they tend to do just fine in the corporations and don't get thrown out, and
Yeah.
people don't really mess with them.
Yeah.
It's just something that there's activists out there that are chanting everything, but sometimes I think the reality of what goes on isn't quite as severe
As we think.
because someone like that's authentic, and people respond to authenticity whether they agree with it or not. That type of authenticity, not this,
Yeah.
the dark side of that word, where that individual assertion. You know what I'm saying? So,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. The reason I brought this up, and I talked about theosis on the cross, because even the way what the gospel writers chose to write about the cross, it wasn't just Christ alone up there, right? It was the thieves. It was the thieves on either side. It was the people, John and his mother, and the women that stayed by the cross. Friendship with Christ was still present in the trauma, right? And it's so where I was going with this is connecting this to the fact that and Christ said to the disciples in his discourse, his final discourse before the crucifixion, "I now call you my friends." Philia, remember the love of the beautiful, the philia love. So where I'm going with this is that how important friendship is, how important to understand our salvation is always communal. Theosis is communal. It's achieved, so to speak. I hate to use that word. I can't, but I'm not smart enough to think of something better. It's experienced through friendship, through communion, through communal. It's never individualistic. And this individualistic mindset that creeps into Christianity through truth, goodness, and beauty versus beauty, goodness, and truth really works against us. It drives us sometimes to seek our truth, and we seek it individually, not understanding or not recognizing that most of what we learn comes communally. And on top of that, it comes through the shared suffering with others, right? Some, shared joys too. I don't mean to be a downer because I don't. I hope I'm not coming across downer at all because I don't feel that way. I'm just saying that it's to get to that place of joy. It's often through the fire, and sharing that together. It opens us up to the beauty of God in all situations, even the most ugly. Not right away, and maybe sometimes never, if what we've personally experienced is such a horrible atrocity. Although I'm not sure that's true, because like your friend and people, not me personally, but people I've talked to, they've gone through some horrific things. Some of the beauty that comes from them and what they do is amazing. So, to me, it's just, okay, Michael, you're on the journey. You're not there yet, but you see it. You see it in these people. So something's there. And then we learn, the more the depth of our faith, and we can connect the dots. So, any reactions to that?
Talk a little bit about in opposition, perhaps,
Mhm.
or in consideration with that, those who retreat to cells.
Retreat to
Cells. Yes.
Yeah.
Monks.
Monks, right,
nuns,
yeah.
Out in the desert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Compare those.
Oh yeah, that okay. So that's a
because they're not community with other humans.
No, and there are special vocations
Mhm.
that God calls people to, right? Monastics, whether they're solitary monastics,
Mhm.
are called to a special vocation of prayer
Mhm.
that God calls them to the purpose that they can only have in that solitude. That's not the norm for most people, right? So when we look at that, we have to understand that's a special vocation, a special calling from God. Monastics themselves that get in those small communities, they also have a special vocation of prayer. And a lot of our understanding, John and I were talking about this yesterday, a lot of our understanding of our faith comes out of the monastic communities.
Mhm.
But our challenge is not to try to become monastics, right? Which we all can slip up sometimes, especially in the beginning of our faith. You tell yourself, don't bother me, I'm in prayer, that kind of thing. You're trying to go deeper, and they're just a nuisance, which is really wrong-headed thinking. But I think I've slipped into it. I'll fess up. But and if Mary were here, maybe she's listening online, she could fess me up more. But the difference is they have a calling, And the monastics themselves, the Holy Fathers that were they will speak, and maybe we'll get into this sometime. They will speak reverently about those of us that are called to marriage, or those of us that are called to the single life, but outside of a monastic community, and what that means for us, and you know what it looks like from a community perspective. So we just have to understand that most of us aren't called in that direction, but we need to be thankful that those are, because those are the people that are probably the most responsible for holding the world together, right? You know, they're like the 10 found in Sodom and Gomorrah that he wouldn't destroy. They're just gonna find 10, right? There's people out there that are living a life of fervent prayer that lifts us all up. But our challenge is in our everyday life as non-monastics, right, that aren't called to a solitary prayer life, or even a smaller cloistered community, because most of us participate in multiple communities. There are communities in our home that begin with our spouses and our children. There's the communities in our church. There's the communities in our workplace, right? We have all these communal opportunities and places we're at. And our job is to be consistently Christ-like in all of them. I mean, you know, it manifests itself differently, and we learn a lot from the monastics. We learn what they can teach us. And you know, the problem is our lack of ability to apply it properly in the quote unquote real world. But that's why we have each other, so we can mess up together and learn, right? Seriously, we do. I mean, I learn more from my mistakes and other mistakes than I do from any successes, right? So, all right, that seems like a good spot to end, unless anybody has any questions.
I was just gonna say, I have a hard time thinking of Jesus as my friend, but maybe that's just me. But
yeah, I know, because especially as Orthodox, because we're so oriented to such a reverential worship. But he did say, I know what you mean, like he's, you know, Talladega Nights. He's not going to come wearing the party tuxedo shirt, right? Remember that movie? Okay, that gets a little hokey, and some of our Christian brothers and sisters fall into that. You know, but you know, there's a certain innocence to that too. So I don't want to rail on it too much, but
I know what you're saying.
yeah. But the point being is, in the evolution of our deepening love, we always think of agape, and that's true. But philia understood in a different way, and this friendship with Christ way is even a step beyond, right? We have a desire for Christ, we have that sacrificial love, and then we have that friendship with Christ, where, and you see it in the saints, certain saints, it would be impossible for them to have a shred of hatred to anybody else because of their deep friendship with Christ. All of us aren't there, you know, but I know what you mean. And it's kind of like, you know, Jesus, my buddy.
Well, it makes me think of one time I saw, you know, the bumper sticker "Got Milk." I saw one that said "Got Jesus." And to me, that was a little extreme. Like, we're kind of comparing.
It should be a little longer. Talk about the land of milk and honey and a little bit of exegesis. You know, that can fit on a bumper sticker, right? So we'll cut him a break. So, all right. Well, we didn't cover everything. I didn't think we would. We covered a lot. I felt very somber in here today, so I hope I didn't kick off the new year with this educational year with bringing people down. So anyway, God bless all of you online. Thank you for joining. I didn't say it earlier, but I'll go back and look at comments. If there's comments I missed that somebody asked me a question or warranted a response, but mainly this is for you to listen in on and comment, and I'll certainly get back to you. So we'll be back next week. I think we're going straight through. I think I don't think there's any Sundays off until around Thanksgiving. So we'll be going straight through every Sunday and beyond. So God bless everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we will be back next week. Thank you.